Hello and welcome to Getting Lost with me and my good friend.
Dan, who is completely lost about Lost.
Yeah. So episode number 5, White Rabbit. It's another Jack heavy one.
Focus on Jack, doing the flashback bits and pieces, so we get to know a bit more about like why he was on the plane, all the other bits and pieces. It felt like a good episode. I think it was the Jack storyline was interesting in terms of and provided a bit of explanation as to some of the questions that I'd been asking about him beforehand. So I think when we talked about the pilot, you sort of had this: why he keeps trying to separate himself from the
Yeah.
group. Why is he clearly is the kind of hero leader character, but he's very reluctant to actually be that type of character. And to some extent, it addressed the alcohol bit that came up again in the pilot type thing.
Yeah, bit of a swerve there where it's not him, it's not connected to him, it's connected to his dad.
Yeah. So yeah, in all, it was definitely it was interesting on both the levels, because you also had the looking for water plot sort of going on as well, and this first sort of active signs of the group sort of disagreeing with each other and fighting with each other, that sort of bits and pieces, which was an interesting take to go on. So yeah, definitely enjoyed it as an episode. So it wasn't as good as the Locke episode, but then
But then few really are, really, because Locke's amazing. Yeah, I think, it's got some really interesting, definitely some really interesting stuff in there. Obviously, we open up with the kind of
world's worst lifeguard.
swimming rescue and the world's worst lifeguard.
Yeah, it's great. It's like you've got one guy who's introduced himself as having one specialist, not very particularly useful skill of lifeguard, and what does he do? Completely fails on his lifeguarding.
But then I think to some extent this is deliberate, because now we've been told he's a lifeguard. It's been demonstrated he doesn't really know what he's doing twice.
Yep.
Forces you to question: is he really a lifeguard? Is that true?
And it's kind of interesting because you've got this. It's almost a direct contrast to Jack himself. So Jack, you've got the very capable but reluctant to be the hero type of person, while with Boone, it's almost the exact opposite, where he clearly wants to be the hero but is completely incompetent. And so
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously during that whole rescue thing, they throw you a bit of a sly curveball in that Jack, gets out there, starts diving, looks for somebody,
yeah,
pulls up Boone, and then you kind of momentarily confused because you think, I thought that it was a woman.
yeah.
And then there's obviously the revelation that the woman is still out there.
And you've got the sort of it's the sex. There's a semi bit of cheapness in that it's the woman is a character we don't ever have met, as far as I'm aware. But it's one of those where you kind of let that go to some extent, because there will be characters you don't know and it's still early days type thing. You certainly can't be doing that much later in the show if it continues on, that you're going to clearly know all the survivors in a relatively short space of time.
Yeah.
But I think it was also like the combined reaction that you had two reactions for the failure. You had Jack's reaction from the failure and Boone's reaction for the failure, and Boone sort of blaming Jack for just not leaving him type thing.
But the thing I did think is quite funny about that sequence, though, is you get the shot of everybody else on the beach kind of like looking concernedly on, but nobody else tries to help.
No, literally nobody does anything else type thing.
I mean, at the very least, from the characters that we know, you think Kate would try to help. You'd think Saeed would try to help.
Yeah.
We've even seen Sawyer actually doing this kind of thing, even though he portrays himself as the, outsider.
I can't quite remember who comes up and to tell Jack that that's the problem. Is it Hurley?
So Charlie comes up and says to somebody in the water. To be fair to Charlie, he does say, "I can't swim."
I can't swim, yeah. But then everyone else is just sort of standing. Even
everybody
when
else, just drops.
And even when Jack sort of brings Boone back and then has to go back in again, you kind of think, well, why is no one else going back in again? Going in at that point, because even if they're not sure what the hell's going on, that should have been fairly obvious. So yeah, the dynamic of that was a little bit weird, but again, you kind of assume that's just the writers wanting to create this particular situation, and so that's how it panned out.
Yes, I think it's just one of those funny little things. It's like you wouldn't question it if they didn't just have that shot in with everybody watching. Like, yeah. But the fact they had that shot in where everybody's kind of watching it, you're like, is nobody helping?
I guess all it does is it shows that they are viewing Jack as the hero figure. Yeah,
Yes, I guess yeah, it helps feed into that idea that
yeah,
Jack will do it. Jack will save them.
yeah. Because
And I
that's
think it's
something that becomes an issue later on, where everyone. So when you get the water scenario going on, and they're like, "Well, what do we do about this? What do we do about that? What do we do about this?" And it's and Jack's like, leave me alone," type thing, and that sort of feeds into that everyone is just basically watching and going, "Well, yeah, Jack will sort this."
yeah, and I think that was quite. I think it's quite good that this episode comes quite early. So before, because obviously, as you say, we've already got Jack kind of established at this point as the kind of central hero
Yeah,
character, the almost perfect kind of guy. So I think it's quite nice to have an episode relatively early where you get him starting to kick back at everybody,
yeah.
expecting him to take charge. And then obviously we get some reasoning into that from the flashbacks and his
Flashback type thing. The world's worst father figure.
yes, with the terrible father, emotionally manipulative father figure.
I thought the sort of stuff with the father was really interesting because I watched the episode twice, and the first time through, I definitely kind of felt, oh, wow, this guy's a total tool. It's like, really, that's the approach you're taking with your son. That's like you're not good enough, you can't be a hero type thing. But interesting, like the second time round, it almost felt much more that he was probably channeling like his own insecurities type thing.
Yes.
Because like he does this terrible example of like how he was doing surgery and the person dies type thing.
Yeah.
And he's which is like, is that a really great story?
And his kind of his point is, but I can cope with the failure. You can't cope with the failure. But then, I think it's the flashbacks go on. You kind of get the
clearly
idea.
Can't cope with the failure because he's an alcoholic, a drug taker type person. So actually, the sort of second time around, when you know that's where it's coming, you actually kind of think, oh, okay, yes, he's been a really terrible father, but what is probably going on here is that's actually he's trying to protect Jack in his own way, that if he does what he does, he'll just end up in the same spiral and trouble that he's gone through type thing. So it was kind of interesting seeing it twice.
And I think and I think initially you kind of think, oh, Jack has internalized the fact that he can't lead because of what his father's been saying to him. But I think as you get towards the end of the episode, I think you kind of realize it's not just the fact that he's kind of internalized what his father's clearly said to him as he's growing up. He's also actually seeing what's happened to his dad.
Yeah.
So he's kind of like, well, I don't want to end up as my dad, like in that same scenario.
And that's presumably what in his own bad way, the dad is trying to do, in those early scenes, in terms of, if you put yourself out there, you're putting yourself in a position to get hurt.
Yeah. And I think they handle the obviously the side of it, which is the dad figure on the island, really well.
Yes.
So I like a lot of particularly the little touches in it. Like I think it's one of the times where he appears in the jungle or walks past, or the figure walks past, you hear like the clink of ice cubes.
Right. Okay.
And it matches like the sound that you had in that early scene where he's drinking the whiskey and talking about the boy that died on his table.
Yeah, and because the very first shot of him of the dad, ignoring the shots that you'd seen of when he was the guy in the suit on the island, but the first shot you see of him in the flashback is just a close up of the whiskey glass.
Yeah,
that's they do a lot of this, or they've done a lot of it so far of this sort of framing the first shot that you see, or the framing of the transition shots between the island and the thing. Quite interestingly, certainly I thought the revelation that he was the guy in the suit that Jack was seeing, I thought was really well done, because it almost fluctuated between, oh, here's a rational explanation, and then here, oh, actually, no, it's not a rational explanation, because it still doesn't quite add up. So you had the fact he was the one seeing him, and then and when you sort of realise, oh, it's his father, you kind of think, oh, okay, it's Jack being tired and hallucinating and all the other bits and pieces. But and you've got a few things that doesn't quite charm with that, because you've got, first of all, there's several occasions where the father basically leads him somewhere, leads him to the water and to his casket, in the same sort of way. And you go, that's just can't be just dumb luck.
And the casket is empty, obviously.
And then you've got the fact that the casket is empty, and you're like, oh, okay. And then in the back of your mind, you're sort of remembering, well, Locke has somehow magically healed and is walking around. Is this a similar sort of thing, type thing? So it's
interesting, because this is the first time like you've had any of the characters openly start talking about the island being special, because you have that dialogue scene between Jack and Locke.
Yeah.
Well, Locke is like, if I, tell me from your doctor's point of view why you're seeing this figure. And Jack kind of says, well, I'm lacking sleep. It's an hallucination, stress. And then Locke actually starts talking about, well, this island is special. What if it's not?
Yeah.
And like Jack doesn't particularly remark on it, but like that's the first time like any character has kind of started going, this island is magical.
Yeah. Because it's the everything happens for a reason type thing. I think that was this episode. Like,
yeah,
yeah. But yeah, that was all. I thought that was really well done, and it definitely kept the intrigue going, because it was almost like, oh, here's an explanation as to what's going on, and you're like, no, this doesn't actually add up. So you've actually still got left with the mystery of it, even if I guess Jack can internalize it as being, oh, that was what I was seeing type thing. So he can continue on his merry way, thinking he was just going a bit nuts due to tiredness and heat exhaustion type thing. But as the audience, it's like, oh, that doesn't add up. There's still something clearly going on there. You had there was a few little undertones, like the fact that the casket was in a cave, so you have a sort of possible biblical reference there, and bits and bits going on.
And I think they do that thing as well where they sneak in a few more, at least character-based kind of mysteries or questions that you don't necessarily realize straight away. Because you have the bit in the flashbacks where Jack's mum is convincing him to go out and find his dad.
Yeah.
And there's just this one line about after what, like where she says, after what you've done.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what has Jack done?
Yeah.
So then that kind of feeds into the, not only if you got the Jack doesn't want to become his dad, there's also that question of, is there also an element of something that Jack has done has fueled his dad's behavior?
Yeah.
So is there like a guilt element as well?
Yeah, because that was the sort of other, I guess, question that you got in, because it was very much a harsh statement by the mother. And, it was like, because it completely floored Jack in terms of he didn't want to do it. Yes. And then that one line, and he's immediately on a plane to Sydney to, well, I guess, it was the first time you kind of saw characters almost interacting in the flashbacks, because you saw the two Koreans in the queue.
Jin in the background.
Yeah. Jin there.
Which actually is a nice little touch, because we'll get onto it next time, but obviously that connects into the next episode a little bit.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think I really liked in that conversation between Jack and Locke, I really liked the line, crazy people think they're getting saner.
Right. That was it, yeah, because that was when Jack was sort of trying to explain away what he was seeing type thing, and said, oh, yeah, I'm going crazy type thing. And that was well, no, you're not, because if you're going crazy, you wouldn't recognise it.
Oh, yeah, and the other line I actually made a note of from that dialogue is one that actually raises questions about Locke again, and the interaction he's had, or the interaction that we think he's had with the monster in the woods.
Yeah,
because he says, I've looked into the eye of this island.
Yes, I've got that actually written down in my notes as well. Looked into eye of this island, ? Maybe the monster. That was what I put down.
Yeah, pretty much the same note I made. It's like, well, what does he mean by that? Like, what has he looked at?
Yeah, and yeah, because the two lines I wrote down from that were this place is different, special, everyone knows it, and then they're looking into the eye of this island, and it's the Locke person who seems to have recognised it. He's the only one talking about it, and he's the one that, as you said, has potentially had some interaction that he's hiding from the rest of the group, which we're aware of. So
Yeah, so I think it's probably, I think for Locke it's that element, and obviously he's the only person who's got a direct, obvious thing where he's walking again.
Yeah,
None of the other characters have a direct, obvious kind of personal thing that's affected them, even though some of them have encountered like weird stuff.
yeah, yeah. He's the one who logically knows there's something weird going on. Yeah, everyone else you can kind of, well, we've had a plane crash and all of the other bits and pieces you can come up with rational explanations for, but he's the one where I can walk again. Something clearly going on here, so it makes sense that he's the one who's doing it.
I'm paying a more interest in the episode titles this time around because White Rabbit is basically set up the fact that Jack's dad leads him to the cave, to the water, because that was what the White Rabbit essentially did in Alice.
Is it Locke who I think Locke specifically names it as the right rabbit, isn't it? Because he says, follow the right rabbit or follow your right rabbit in order to do it.
And I think elsewhere, the sort of notes I've got, some things happening elsewhere, you get a little bit on Sun and Jin's relationship. This is the first time that you're told they're husband and wife.
Yep. And you've got their interaction with with Sawyer to some extent, but you've got the fact that Jin basically says, "Oh, I'll get you water." He's looking after Sun, but he's doing it sort of on his own type thing.
Yeah. And I think the other note that I made, and I'm not sure whether it was, I'm kind of convinced it was deliberate, where there's in the costuming, there's a lot of characters wearing white, primarily white, and there's a handful of characters wearing primarily black.
Right. Okay.
Whereas so far, I think in other episodes, people have been in a bit of a, have people in white tops or whatever, but there's been a bit of a mishmash of what people are wearing. But this time I noticed, and there was one particular scene, I think, where I noticed it, where it was Jack, Kate, Saeed, and Locke, and they were having a discussion on the beach just before Jack goes off.
Right, yeah.
Or before Locke goes off to find water. And I noticed that all of them were wearing like white tops.
Right, yeah.
And then once I noticed that, you had Sawyer in black, you've got Jack's dad in black.
Yeah.
The one bit that makes me question what they're doing with that, because to have so many characters in these colours is clearly a choice. The bit that makes me question what was supposed to be signalled is Claire is in black, so they're pregnant.
Claire, yeah, well, because there is a scene where Claire comes along to see Kate, and Kate's basically sorting out all the clothes.
Yes.
Yeah, which again, it could just be a sort of like, well, we need to have some kind of interaction point, but again, it would have been a choice to have them dealing with the clothes, and it was to do with, she was sorting between practical and impractical clothes was the sort of line, I think. So yeah, I mean, it's not something I picked up on. I'm now unfortunately going to be looking for what people are wearing in all the future episodes.
I think I particularly noticed it because obviously, I've suggested it before, and it's starting to come through that the colours of black and white do start to be quite significant. And I think it was, like I say, it was just that one scene where they were talking about going to get water, where they're like all of the, in inverted commas, hero characters were wearing white. Though I do wonder how they've been washing their clothes, because nearly every episode they get mucky, and then they seem to be wearing something clean the next time.
Yeah, I mean, my assumption is that they've actually got a lot of clothes, because presumably, they've picked up most of their own luggage and bits and pieces, so they've probably got a week's worth of clothes with them, most people. And I don't think it's only supposed to have been a few days. It's not supposed to be.
I think, to be fair, I think they mentioned 6 days.
Yeah.
6 days.
Because I mean, it was basically they'd had food up to that point, and then at this point it was obviously we're running out of water type things. They can't have been that long in terms of on the island, because otherwise they'd have dealt with these problems earlier. So yeah, I was kind of assuming that it was only sort of a few days into the process. Yeah, I quite liked the sort of the water issue coming up. I mean, I thought they dealt with that quite well, and the fact they had to deal with it without Jack there.
Yeah.
Quite interesting. And you've got this sort of slightly weird thing in that everyone else is dealing with the problem, and Locke's out looking for water, and Jack doesn't even, he's been distancing himself, doesn't want to get involved in it, all the other bits and pieces. Yeah, it's ultimately Jack that solves the problem by finding
Yes,
the
yeah.
water supply.
Yeah, and I think that feeds in again to like I think it's the next episode where he finally decides I'm gonna push people
Yeah.
to get organized.
Yeah, well, I mean, he takes his first step on that at the end of this episode, because the end of it is when the fight breaks out, when Boone is revealed. Boone's the one who's got the water in some, yet again, incompetent move in terms of, I'm going to look after the water and sort out the rationing, but not tell anyone. It's like, right, okay. Don't really see how that works as a plan, but okay.
And then I'm gonna start pouring water down Claire's throat while she's asleep, like without warning.
Yeah. And then, but Jack comes back and basically sort of says, I found the water. This is what we're going to do. If we can't live together, we're going to die alone.
Yes, yeah.
And so that's, to me, was the sort of, it's gone through this mini arc of him trying to figure out what he's doing. And you have the line from Boone saying, you can only lead when you know where you're going, which emphasised that. So he's chased his white rabbit. He's got a sort of resolution on that. And he seems to be sort of now accepting, okay, I'm willing to step up and sort of.
I think, and the other small thing I made a note of, and I actually can't remember whether this connects into anything, was the creepy dolls. Like Jack finds the creepy doll, like he finds one in the water, and then like you see if like a shot of a few others scattered on the floor, and obviously they've come out of that bit of plane, like where Dad's coffin has been. But yeah, just creepy dolls.
Creepy dolls, yeah. You kind of go, how on earth did those things get in the cave and all the other bits and pieces? There's sort of a lot of mystery about that sort of thing. But
yeah, the nature of Lost, it trains you to start questioning like everything. You're like,
right, okay. Yeah. It's like, something has appeared on screen. This must be important.
Which I think they did. I think the showrunners definitely have fun with. They definitely throw some stuff that's just completely random and goes nowhere, and then people are like, "This must mean something," and the showrunners are just like, "No, just there were some dolls in the plane."
So yeah, in terms of the mysteries for this episode, I guess, which is I kind of think you've got a sort of partial explanation for the man in the suit, which I think is still a mystery, but it's interesting they've gone there.
Yeah, so it's addressed. Obviously, you get addressed like who it is and why it's Jack that's seeing it.
Yeah,
but you don't get, as you say, you don't get that clarification of is it a hallucination or something more than that.
And I'm leaning towards something more than that at this point, but it's definitely that bit. And I think the couple of extra questions that have come up is what you've already said it, like what did he do to his dad? And the other thing I wrote down is like, why on earth has his dad gone to Australia? That was the other thing. It seemed odd that if you're going on your sort of crazy booze hound thing that you'd go.
Yeah, those are definitely the main kind of things raised.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the interaction in terms of when people started to leap to conclusions about the water thing. Sawyer is immediately under suspicion.
And then I guess, you just get that little bit of tension, I guess, sexual tension between Sawyer and Kate when she tackles him.
Yeah.
He's gone to his stash, which ends up with him throwing the Marshall badge at her.
Yeah, which seemed like an odd thing to do. Yeah, it's like, okay.
That, I think, covers episode 5, White Rabbit.
And that was White Rabbit. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Getting Lost. Please do let us know your thoughts about the episode in the comments below, and join us next time.